Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. We had the pleasure of speaking to Selena Sage, the jovial, very loving, very sweet soul who's living on an island off the coast of Africa and barely was able to connect with us because they had a power outage recently, and apparently that's a thing over there in these islands. So I'm glad she was able to come on and, really grace us with her experiences and her wisdom and her perspective on life and spirituality.
Yeah, she has been on a spiritual journey. You can find her at selenasage.com, which I'll put in the notes. She's written several ebooks. She has a podcast. She's a wonderful teacher and author. And we just felt incredibly grateful to be blessed by her presence. And she was just as gracious back to us. She reflected that back to us. She was just a sweet soul, really, from the first moment I reached out to her to ask her for the podcast. She was like, yeah, soul sister, let's do this. So enjoy our conversation with Selena.
Absolutely.
Hello. Welcome, Selena, to our podcast.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Lovely to see you both.
Our Nikki Walton connection when we interviewed her last month, she's like, "Oh, Selena's amazing, and help me with this book." Oh. And she's like, "She'd be a good person for you to interview." And I'm like, "Yeah."
Thank you. Nikki's the best, really.
Yeah, it's been a divine connection now for both of you. So we're going to dive into our question that we asked to kind of get the conversation going. So, many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to, question their reality they were taught or their conditioning. So do you remember when you became a seeker?
Yes, I feel like it was when I was a child, 8 years old. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I attended Sunday school and, really loved, the teachings of Jesus, still very influential for me. But there was something that I felt like, I had friends from around the world that were of various religions, and I just had this desire to really understand the differences. And so I bought my first book with money I'd saved, Teachings of the Buddha, when I was probably 10 years old, a little bit older. And that started a lifelong search and study of different spiritual paths.
Wow.
Yeah.
You bought a book about the Buddha when you were 10.
Yes, I did. Totally transformed. Yeah.
And that transformed you then even at 10?
Yes. Not that I wouldn't say I had a spiritual awakening at 10, but I feel like I was exposed to this idea that there were various paths to reach the same truth, to reach the same place. And that really expanded my horizons and helped me to see the unity of various paths. Yeah.
So would you consider, like, say you were raised Catholic, but there was some, like I was raised Catholic too, but it was pretty loose. Like my dad was raised Catholic and my mom just sort of went along with it, but she wasn't into it at all. So, when I started to have, questions, it wasn't a big deal. So was it a big deal in your family, or were you supported?
I was profoundly, divinely blessed with amazing parents. It's actually my mother's birthday today that we're doing interviews. I'll say happy birthday, Mom. And thanks. And my parents were always really supportive of my curiosity. And my father always says my favorite question from the moment I could speak was why. And he would answer a question, I'd say why, and he'd answer another question, say why. And it said it actually caused him to do more research so he could answer all my questions, bless his heart. And my mom was the Catholic, and my father is actually of a different denomination. And we had an agreement that I could study whatever I wanted, explore religions, but I had to go to church on Sunday and Sunday school. And so I agreed to that, and it continued throughout high school, and I'm glad for it because it provided a kind of a basis of not only just being an explorer of this path from childhood, but also different relationships and friendships that I still have to this day from that experience.
That's awesome, man. I have 3 kids, and one of them's 11, one of them's 9, and if I had to have a negotiation like that with one of them, I hope that I would treat it like that, because that's a great, give them space, give them the ability to explore, experiment, and just, kind of, I don't know, foster the questioning while still maintaining some kind of a rooted, what we'll call ritual or, religion, to kind of cover the parental raising mechanism, I guess. So that's a really great negotiation that you guys had at that age.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I think, to your point, it provides like healthy boundaries too, where I learned the benefit of consistency while also still being open to explore. And I feel like if I look at my life now, there's so many ways that was repeated. And I've maintained that sense of consistency and completion while still being kind of a, nomadic soul that's, living on a remote island and still making space to write books and talk to both of you. So it works out.
Absolutely.
Well, we got a peek at the end, not the end of the book, but sort of the middle of the book, which I love because that's what piqued my interest too. But I know that there's more turning points too. So what is the next sort of turning point or shift that you can recall after that?
Which book are you talking about?
Oh, no, your book. I meant the book of your life.
Okay.
When you said, oh, I live on a remote island, I'm like, yes, that's the end. Well, not quite the end of the book. That's your middle of your journey.
Got you.
But
okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was thinking my actual books, since I have
so many.
I have real books. So I was like, which book are you talking about? I got, the book of my life. So yes, I think that exploration continued. And in college, I went to Northwestern University in Chicago. I was raised in Austin. And so when I was in Chicago area, I discovered a Baha'i temple. And that was really amazing because Baha'i is a faith that kind of combines a lot of other faiths, and there are spiritual symbols of all different paths on the temple. And so I would go there and do my spiritual reading. And around that time, I discovered Taoism. And Taoism was a fundamental shift for me of, it felt so liberating and so freeing. And later, when I moved to California after college, I found the only Taoist monk living in North America. And and we became friends, and I got twice weekly acupuncture from him and Qi balancing, learned Tai Chi, Qigong, and so that was, I think, the second major turning point for me, where I suddenly had an abundance of reading that I'd done. And then I sort of had this experience with someone who grew up in a monastery as a monk and learned so much from him.
Oh my goodness. So, I mean, from being drawn to that book when you were 10 to then finding that's obviously your path. And, we could go into story about it probably being from lifetimes, but, we want to honor all beliefs.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, but I know that there's more, because I was super intrigued about the leaving corporate, because I have a couple of friends who have done that, but I love that story too, because I know that usually there is some suffering around that and some pain. Like a lot of Sean and I were excited to get into this podcast to see, what are the similarities, what are the differences of these seekers, because there is some commonalities. And yes. I would say, 80 or 90%, it's like the opening is from suffering. That's certainly been my journey. But so far it's like, or at least you're not sharing, there's not a lot of pain and suffering there yet.
Yeah, I've had that question a lot, and my corporate departure, that was later. So I met the monk, and then, years later, like 3 years after, that's when I left corporate. But I have to say that truly, I've been very, very blessed that my path was not because of suffering. It was really more of, I feel like it was almost like I was being pulled, and And my moving in that direction was because of the spiritual curiosity of wanting to understand all that I've been reading since I was 10. And so I don't feel that it was because of suffering. I mean, I definitely had, relationships that didn't work out, and I'm sure all of those things pushed me along. But it was really more of just this desire for that freedom that I was reading about in the Tao Te Ching and wanting to know what that was like. And my life, I feel I've just been extremely blessed that there was not even my corporate departure. It wasn't because it was so painful and so awful I had to leave. I actually wrote my first book while I was still working. And when I got the book in my hand, I was like, okay, I'm supposed to go talk about this now. And that I walked away from my career for that reason. So so my story is not, I don't find that it's like a suffering story. It's really just more of this constant evolution in this journey that I now understand was of no distance, but it took me around the world and, and lots of different explorations and brought me back to me.
The journey that was no distance.
Yes.
That's the quote of the day.
Thanks.
It's funny.
Yes.
We just, I think Corinne and I don't know if it was last Monday or Thursday, we had a conversation and we talked about that where it's like, you kind of come full circle back to that being that is inquisitive, that being that is, looking out for an adventure or connecting with that gravity or whatever that is drawing you through that adventure. And you generally come back to that feeling somewhat unchanged, right? But then also profoundly, with a new perspective, it seems like everything has changed. So that's an interesting way to put it for sure. Yeah, no, it's,
I say journey of no distance because you are always it. But initially you don't see that. You always, I won't say always, we're often conditioned to look outside of ourselves. And so that leads us, looking for this sense of completion in other people or in other places or in other experiences. And I think I've been so lucky that I've had, such an amazing life and lived, on the beach in California with a great job, lots of vehicles. I had all that stuff. And then it lets you know that, okay, there's nothing more to get. So what does that leave you? It kind of leaves you to go back within yourself because there's nothing out there. It's all in. And I think that was how I came to the place where I am now.
Well, and I'm glad you said conditioning. We are conditioned to have these perspectives. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot is the conditioning from our childhood, the conditioning from, our past beliefs, past traumas. And it seems like you were allowed at a young age to maybe create your own conditioning, or rather the lack of conditioning, in that you were able to explore spirituality pretty freely and you weren't forced into a dogma. You had the ability to experiment. So when I say, did you have a lot of conditioning to overcome through that period of time, like college to, corporation, or was there not a lot of conditioning that you can recall having to work through?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that when I think about my family, there's a lot of success and like change making and, just amazing family. And I think that sort of conditioned me to have this idea of success, meaning, changing the world for the better, helping people. Those are the kinds of things that I was conditioned to understand, which are all very positive, which I know that I still hold those things to be important. But as far as like spiritual conditioning, no, it was really just, it's sort of like the greatest commandment is love. So it's like love. And that I think is present in all of the paths. And even through Zen, which I sort of, explored after Taoism, I found that emptiness is actually full of love. And so it all, for me, it's all really connected. And I think that the conditioning, if I think of any conditioning I might have had, was all very positive. And it helps support me in this independent and free life, and then to transcend it as well.
Yeah, because it even transcend the independent and free life.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something worth a moment of pause, because that always feels like that's supposed to be the goal. And when you, at least from my experience, when you get there and you realize that there can still be feelings of whatever, anxiety, worry, all of those things are still present. I think that's harder for people to understand. And when I think about, and perhaps this is coming from my time in LA, I lived in Los Angeles for 8 years. You think about the very wealthy, the celebrities, and people don't understand why they might be depressed or might have anxiety. And I think that it's when you have all those things that people strive for, or at least a portion of them, you recognize that it's not about the things, it's all an inside job. And I think that's one of the quotes on your email: happiness is an inside job. It's perfect. And it's so true. And I think that it sounds cliche, but that's the whole thing. And that inner exploration is what allows that opening to happen.
Mm. Yeah. So, Selena, can you talk about your personal journey to, I can't remember the question you have, but I'm sure you'll know what it is. So when I first started on the path years ago, it was just literally to get out of pain and suffering. It was just like, why is this all so painful? And so I was driven by that. And then, of course, I sort of was introduced to many different teachers. And then, of course, ended up in Tiruvannamala and Ramana, and then been studying with Adyashanti for many years. Okay. Yeah. So my internal question on this path has sort of changed over time. So you had said, and I can't remember what you said a few minutes ago, but what your internal question was. Can you recall sort of how that transformed, if it has transformed?
Yeah, internal question. I think what I was saying before was that I was trying to understand what I was reading, and to understand that, that liberation, and what does that mean, that the Tao that cannot be named is not the eternal Tao. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Like, what does that mean? So I think I was driven by the desire to understand. That was the first thing. And then when I would hear new teachings like Sri Ramana and the famous "Who am I?" question, trying to understand those questions was what really inspired me. And actually, my first book is a book of questions. So nice. It was really, I was transformed by living those questions. And I think it kept raising new questions until there were no questions. And so it wasn't that there was like one prominent thing that stood out. It was more just this desire to understand. Desire to understand.
And have you found?
Sorry, Sean. I just wanted to repeat that and get it. So go ahead, hon.
Have you found understanding in these questions?
Yes, I feel that I reached a point where the questions dissolved me as the questioner. And so...
Holy shit. No, massive. That hit my chest. That hit my heart really big. Sorry. I apologize. I did not mean to interrupt.
You guys are awesome. Thank you. No, it's beautiful. Thank you. I feel the love all the way over here. But yeah, that was really what happened. And I feel that if you are earnest in your seeking and you really approach the questions with a sincere desire to understand or to get it, to overcome whatever your intention is, like that energy, like it's like grace meets you there. And then it all just fades. It all dissolves in love. You dissolve in love.
Wow. I'm sorry. That really, it dissolved. The questions dissolved the questioner. I mean, holy shit. That is a doozy that I got to sit on for a moment. So, Corinne, you ask a question. I'm done I need 2 minutes.
You're awesome, Don. Thank you.
He is awesome. That's why we have this podcast, because we both have such a different way sort of approaching things. And yet we have spent a lot of years together. So we can,
Yes.
just this
beautiful
love. It's this love that we
I
have
love
of the truth. So
Awesome.
your internal, do you mind sharing sort of your internal, like understanding? So, and I know everybody's different. We all wake up differently. And so, but maybe, so what's been happening for me is that, like, over the years, I have a massive amount of love within me. Like, I have been in touch. I have been aware of the awareness for many, many years. I was on this path from my 20s, right? And I'm 58 in a couple of weeks. And
no way.
Yeah.
Never would have guessed. Oh my gosh. I thought 25.
You're so sweet. Oh, thank you. And so there's this, like, when I talk to I've got this teacher now who we interviewed weeks back. Her name is Alea, and she studied with Adyashanti. She actually sort of had a spontaneous, I'll send you the link to hers. You might enjoy listening.
Please.
Her stories. Really, she kind of spontaneously woke up. Similar to you, there wasn't a lot of struggle at all. She just was like, you could see it was meant to be. I, on the other hand, have struggled a great deal. And so she describes it as like, your self is my self.
Mm.
There's no, and even Rupert Spira describes that, the same thing. I describe it as, I feel the interconnectedness of everything.
Yes.
But I think now that from what I'm listening, that's sort of fairly common for people that are waking up. But I'm now, and I know there's not supposed to be a goal, but now I'm like, okay, I want to, and I do feel a connection when I see everybody. I do feel a massive love. I feel like that, but like that, does that make sense to you? Your very self is my very self.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. I like that. I think for me, if I were, it's when you put it into words, it sounds a bit radical, but for me, it's like, I am nothing and everything. And there's a realization that this world is because I am, it's like I'm creating this world. And when I'm in a state of, being as awareness, operating as awareness, like there is no world, there's no nothing. There's no me, but there's everything. And so my experience is not even, I agree. Myself is yourself. I think that's fundamentally true. But the oneness that I experience is actually, there are no beings. There's just peace. There's just
beingness.
Yes. There's just isness. There's just isness. Yeah. There's no experience of other. So it's all self. That would be the way that I.
Beautiful. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm glad that makes sense, because putting those things into words, it sounds like kind of crazy, but yeah, that's
not for us. It doesn't.
Good. Very good.
So do you know when that happened? Like for me, it's been very gradual and of course continues on and on. And I can tell I have a new understanding every second, let alone every day. And so do you remember when that sort of became so for you?
Yeah, it was very, fairly recently in the scheme of this phenomenal world and time. If we take it to the spiritual level, there is no time. There is only now.
Yeah.
But I feel that experience for me was like, it's like it happened when I met Muji, it like happened in the instant. I was very fortunate to meet him in Portugal, and it happened. But then it took me like 3 more years of intense study to really like get there on my own. I feel like if you're in the presence of an awakened being, you get that experience if you're really fortunate of feeling it. But then you don't necessarily stay there. And that was my experience. Like I didn't stay there. It's like I had what's in Zen is called kensho, that glimpse. But then it wasn't that full satori. It wasn't that full awakening until maybe last year, where it was like, oh, it's all like, I get it. And my podcast was my way of trying to explore explaining that. And then I developed what I call Instantly Zen, which is this, process, 3-step process, which I'm happy to share with you both too, and all of your viewers, to really like experience that. And for me, that was my way of recognizing that I could not only repeat it, but share it, because I'd understood it and I'd experienced it truly, and not just something that I read and understood. If that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the glimpsing of it. You get these little, taste nuggets. You get this little short-term experience, but it seems like it's something that happens to you, not something you embody. And I think we've had multiple of those experiences. And so when you talk about it took 3 years of practice or study to embody that, what were some of your techniques and practices that you were using to invite that presence into your beingness?
Yeah. That's actually the project Nikki and I worked on, that we'll share that in sometime in the future. No, I'm happy to share my part. I think for me, there was a need to really be silent consistently, be still, and to stay still. And in ways, the pandemic helped me with that, because before I was very nomadic, traveling lots, and then all the airports closed and I couldn't. So in that stillness, there was within me this ability to completely become empty. And that's something, with Muji, the invitation is about that, really becoming truly, truly empty, even of your idea of yourself. And I think that practice repeated helped me to really have clarity. And then when I was able to be empty, then the practice that I utilized was this, what I call this Instantly Zen, this ability to kind of be the observer consciousness and to embody that. And that repeating that helped to solidify the recognition. And I think just because I was earnestly practicing those things, then it just stayed that way. And then it was like, oh yeah, I can be this all the time. I can choose to operate from the identity of awareness, but I can also shift to the identity of the person and have all those, those feelings and experiences. But I have the opportunity at any moment to step away from that, and I don't have to suffer, because I'm not truly the person. The person is just a vehicle of experience for my true nature as awareness itself.
Go ahead.
No, your 3-step process, I'd love to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, I can guide you through it. It doesn't take long. It's a few moments. So I'll just invite you to close your eyes and just be at peace in this moment. Just be peace. And I'll start with you, Corinne. It's just a gentle walkthrough. So I invite you to call to mind a stressful thought. Keeping in mind, the mind is just the current thought. So just call to mind a stressful thought. You don't have to tell me what it is, but just tell me, when you think that thought, what do you feel?
A little tension in my solar plexus.
You feel that in the body. Very good. Now I want you to shift your full attention to that which noticed that feeling of tension. So that noticer that was aware of the tension in your solar plexus. Move your full attention there. And from that space of noticing, I want you to invite you now to look at your mind and tell me what you see. What's there?
Curiosity.
And is any particular question arising? Anything there? Just observing, just looking at the mind. What do you see specifically?
I mean, I've done this for so long that there's kind of a go-to of who, who's having the thought, so.
But yeah, and it's really just like observing, like when you look at the mind, is there anything there? Do you see anything when you're just observing?
No, there's a lot of space.
And from that perspective, from that noticer that's seeing this space, is there anything prior to that noticer?
I mean, there's just noticing that's happening. There is no, there's just noticing that's happening.
Beautiful. And as that noticer, or actually I should ask you, is that noticer separate from you?
No.
And what do you feel? Is there any feeling there?
Maybe some solidifying into and merging of the noticer and the noticing.
Beautiful. And is there any pain there? Is there any suffering there? The noticing.
Not in the noticing. There's still a little tension in the solar plexus, but there's no attachment to it. There's just noticing.
Beautiful. Yeah. And is there any beginning or end or end point for that noticing?
No.
And is that noticing you?
It depends on the definition of you. It definitely, there is an experience happening. It's what I call me.
Does it feel like it's outside of you?
No.
What you describe as yourself? Yeah. Good. Yeah. And that's the experience. And Sean, I can guide you through too, and then we can talk about it collectively. So I don't, rob you of that experience. But if you just close your eyes and call to mind a stressful thought, and you tell me what you're feeling.
I'm feeling anxious in my mind, and then a little bit of muscle tension throughout, just like the shell of my body.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you say mind, if we're thinking of mind as a current thought, what is the physical manifestation of mind to you then?
It's a brain. It's the brain. I mean, it's
the brain. Okay, the brain.
It's an expectation. It's the part of the brain that has an expectation or a fear.
The brain. Yeah, we give it we personify it, but we'll get back. We'll circle back. I won't say too much as you're having this experience. Good. So if you shift your full attention to that noticing, and then keeping in mind that the mind is a current thought. Now, if you look at your mind, what is your experience?
There is no mind, really.
What's there?
Same thing. There's a noticing and observation of that thought, of the process of that thought and of that fear and anxiety.
Yeah. So your experience is similar in that there's no suffering in that noticer.
Correct.
Yeah. And do you experience that noticer as separate from you?
No.
Yeah. Is there a beginning or end point to that noticing?
Not that I can tell, but
Yeah.
even saying that sounds silly.
Yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that's just, kind of, I would say like a shortcut that I feel that allows you to experience your true nature. Like that is what you truly are. And you both experience the same thing, which to me, the truth has consistency, right? Like it's repeatable. Everyone has that experience because it is your true nature, my true nature, our true nature. And what I was going to say earlier about the brain is that it's like we're conditioned to think of the brain as like a thinking organism, that has these like thoughts and processes things. But if we see instead that we are actually what's powering the brain, this consciousness, this awareness, this noticing is actually what's happening, and it's just being experienced through this body form. We recognize that we're prior to even the body and the mind. And I think that's one of the things for me that I had to recognize, and because it was all getting really muddled and it was feeling like, well, aren't I the person? But the more that you can see that the person is it's like a wardrobe, like you're changing clothes, and it's a vehicle for your true nature as that same awareness to experience. And the brain is actually is just part of the, it's like the steering wheel, but it's not doing anything on its own. It's only because of the power of your awareness that it actually is able to do anything. And when that distinction clarified for me, then I recognized that I had a choice. I had a choice of choosing which mode to operate in, that vehicle of the body or the awareness that, always is, that I always am. And that just sort of opened everything for me. But thank you both for being open to that.
Oh, that was wonderful. And that's the glimpse I think, we talk about, or we kind of brought up earlier, where it's, you invite that space, right? You get to that observer space.
Yes.
And so when I asked you what were some of your practices, is because it devolves really quickly back into training, into programming. And so when you ask a question, like where is that fear for me coming from? Well, it's a fear from a training, from something that I should do, that somebody else told me I needed to, or at some point, some trauma point or whatever, tells me to think of it this way. When I go to that space, I don't feel that way at all. There is no feeling really, but it devolves quickly, and all of those, as soon as you have that space, all of those other different, trust me, I got a lot of shit I'm suffering inside of myself with, but it invites all of those beliefs, that programming back to the forefront. They want to just rush back into the forefront. So I guess maybe that's the practice that I'm in personally right now, is inviting that space to continue, or I like the way you put it, discover the choice. Discover the choice and operate from that choice of what I'm focusing on. Am I the observer space, or am I the personality, the wardrobe of beingness, I suppose?
Yeah, no, well said. I would just, one thing stood out, it often comes up. It's like we think of going to that space.
Sure.
And I think if you recognize that you are that space, then it shifts everything. So it's like when you think of being, like you say, you're in peace, I'm in peace. But if you think you are peace, it shifts, like you're both, but it's like, yeah, you know, and recognizing that you are that space. So it's not anywhere that you're going to, it's just that you're dropping all of the distractions and you're getting back to your true nature. You're getting back to that zero place that is you. And so you recognize that all these things, these sufferings or fears that are arising are actually not you, right? They're things that you're attaching yourself to that are not you, because you still exist when you drop them all. Like in that experiment we just did briefly, you know, none of that was present, but you still were, right? Like you're still here. So all of those things they're like, you know, they're like the hubcaps and the bumper stickers and, you know, all this stuff that's being added to the vehicle, but they're not needed to actually move forward. And so I think that the more you recognize that you are that space, you are that, that the essence of all, you know, then you see that you're selecting what you choose to suffer or fear. Like that's because of your direct decision. And it's not something that you are. It's like something you're borrowing. Yeah.
All right. Shit. Really, the funny thing is, like we've had some really, really, you know, conversations like that where they really hit me. So this is not the first time I'm hearing this conversation by all means, and not to diminish the conversation. And we talk about this a lot, where it's there is this experience where you can be told the same thing. You can be shown truth in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
But for some reason, at whatever, you know, convergence point in your timeline of experience, that truth can really overtake you. So I'm not being dramatic right now. This is really just startlingly resonating with everything, and you're basically shutting down, you know, all that stuff that I'm borrowing, which is that when you say that, it's just a beautiful way to put it, that all the things you're borrowing that is not really truly who you are.
Thank you. Bless you. No, I'm thankful for all your previous experiences and conversations that have allowed me to be the recipient of this goodness. So no, please be dramatic. I love it. It's awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful, because I think that, you know, we all, like, this is our opportunity. Like we are freedom itself. And I think that when we experience life in the normal way, in the conditioned way, we're conditioned to think of freedom as something we have to strive for. And the more that we realize that we're already it, and all of the things that we're actually thinking are going to lead us to freedom are actually preventing us from being free, then it's the struggle stops. You know, it's like you just drop everything right now. You're it. You've just experienced it. You both experienced the infinite space that you truly are. And what happens is the mind tries to understand that. And so it's, again, taking this infinite and trying to put it back into this like finite thing. And it never makes sense. But if you just operate as that, you know, as that endless, infinite space, you see that everything still carries on. Like life still goes on. You just get to pick and choose your own adventure. And that's the beautiful part. Like you get to enjoy the great stuff. And then naturally you're detached from everything else. Yeah. Sounds a bit heartless sometimes, but it's really just.
Not at all. Sorry, no, I'm going to interrupt you. No, it doesn't seem maybe that's been your experience from other people. It doesn't feel that way at all. I think that's a wonderful articulation of finding yourself in that space and then the mind trying to understand it and put it in a box. I mean, we as a species have been doing that forever. I mean, and then there are a lot of maps in different spiritual, backgrounds that point to this. I mean, if you really dive into even the words of Christ, which is, let's say the most widely recognized religion, if you
Yes.
really look at the words that he was saying during those times, he was saying all of these things. It,
Yes.
it was just in such a way that at that time was way over society's head,
Yeah.
and that's what I think is really interesting about there is that truth within that, even though that religion has had so much surrounding strife and struggle around it,
Yeah.
and that's what I love about a lot of the stories we've heard about. People do come from a Christian background,
Mm-hmm.
look into other world religions, other world philosophies, but almost everybody that searches gets to that point of like there's truth in all of this,
Yeah.
and then you have to go on your own adventure, and then you have to understand how to embody that wisdom and that. So no, it's not heartless at all. From what I'm
Awesome.
experiencing, it's actually quite profound and fascinating. So
Yeah, and it's beautiful because when there is no other, you naturally love all, and so yeah, the way that I think societally we think about ego and selfishness and me, it sounds like it's all about you, but when you embrace the whole world as you, when you're looking out through the eyes of love at the world, it's all love, and even when we don't understand it, it's like I sort of think of beings as just everyone's having a different level of consciousness. And so a place that someone who's struggling, it's like I've experienced that level of consciousness in my lifetime or moments ago, like there's no like finite formula for how those different levels of consciousness are manifesting, but it's happening all at the same time. And so I think the opportunity of those of us who are fortunate to have these glimpses and these recognitions is that we're kind of holding space and showing, like what Muji did for me was he was a mirror to show me my true nature. And so when you have that experience, it reminds you of what you truly are. And it reminds you how it's possible to be. And yeah, and in that reminder, it's like the more that you trust that, and the more that you release all of the things that you're holding on to and that you're attaching yourself to for good and bad reasons, right? Like not all attachments are necessarily bad, but the more that you're holding on to those things, the less you're experiencing this true liberation. And what I've kind of been exploring lately is a realization that you can still have relationships, but not be attached in those relationships. Like you just show up with love, and then you're observing it all. Like you're the witness of it all, but you don't have to suffer in those relationships. Yeah.
I mean, that's really what agape is,
Mm-hmm.
it is. And that'll be interesting to see because, I mean, you're single, I think, right?
Yes.
And Nikki is single and I am single and Sean is not. And, I have not, my husband and I got divorced about 3 years ago and we're still best friends. He's amazing and I adore him. We
Awesome.
didn't fight. I always tell people we didn't fight before, during, or after our divorce. So that
beautiful.
was, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I do have, with, that's the thing. What I was talking about before is like, it's, to me, when you, like you said, you spent a lot of time in silence, right? To really sort of and so that to me has always been easy. I've done silent retreats for many years. I've, I did a 30-day silent retreat when I was in my 20s and literally found the universe inside myself, right? And I knew at that point, 30 years ago, I knew that nothing I could ever do would ever fulfill like what I found inside. Right. That has permeated my entire life. However, when emotions are involved, I did get through my father's death. And I know I'm saying me, but I'm very like, I feel like we're all connected. We're all one. We have similar experiences. So this challenge, like when my father died a year and a half ago, I was just present. It was beautiful. I was able to show up for my family, for him. I felt like all the work I'd done spiritually was for that. Like it really, I really experienced at that point, like I was just pure presence, pure love, pure awareness. There was no stickiness of the emotions that can really be intense around family situations like that when emotions are so high. Mm-hmm. However, with the emotion of love, being an intimate love with a partner, even though I do believe, like what you're saying, that agape, that's what it's supposed to be, whether it's your family or a friend or a lover, it's all agape. That the non-attachment, that unconditional love. But it will be curious to see, like, I'm like, because I usually don't have any stressful thoughts at all. Like I'm really pretty, like I'm able to, as soon as anything happens, I'm able to kind of go back immediately with stuff. But there was recently, I'm working with an editor for my outline. And so there was a little stressful thought with my editor that I've been dealing with. And so I was able to go into something like that right away.
Yes.
And that's the thing is operating in the world once you have woken up to that, there's the people that are just waking up to that, like that photo I told you about of the girl holding the hair. And then there's the person waking up and we're both at the same time. But that's the thing for me is that being what you had talked about, operating from the thoughts and your personality or but also that background that's always there, able to go back and forth that ultimately is one, but and so, but then when emotions are high, it is harder.
Yeah, that was a lot.
I'm sorry. I was just Sean gets that.
I usually get that.
Don't you feel better, Sean?
I've gotten 2 or 3 times where somebody's just like, that's a lot of words. That's a lot of words.
It's like trying to index it. Yeah. So we started talking about being single, relationships.
Yeah.
But I think that, for me, there is a completeness that I know that I am, I am that I am, to quote the great Christ. And I think that when you recognize I guess that was God to Moses, but still all is one. But when you recognize that, I think, it can manifest in different ways. I mean, I have no desire, full stop. And so that includes like other people and other beings. And even, rescuing Naoya, my dog, was because of, she appeared and she made a cry that was like, save me. And I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. But I think there's a feeling sometimes when you said emotions run high and these things get involved, that's all to do with identifying as the person. Like only the person can experience that. And when you are operating as awareness, as that space, as the observer, as the witness, those things don't get involved. And so I think that whenever there is stress, whenever there are emotions or desires, attachments, to me, that's an immediate recognition that it's the person that's having that. The person.
And we are people. We are people with emotions. That's just not all we are.
Well, I would say that, I sort of see it the opposite way. We are awareness and having this experience as a person.
Yeah, same. Mm-hmm.
In a way, I mean, I think when you say we are people, like that, to me, that's a total. Yeah, I get that. I get that vibe. Yeah. Only because, like, if that's the first belief, then that makes it seem like we're going somewhere to get that experience of peace. Like we're transcending instead of recognizing we are this, and those things are coming up, like limiting our experience and what we truly are. Yeah. So for me, and maybe it's my engineering background, order of operations, like feeling like that recognition of like recognizing myself as the higher, myself as awareness as the higher, choosing to have this experience. And so because I'm choosing to have this experience, any emotions or things that are arising, I also know fundamentally I'm choosing that. And so then it calls me to recognize if that's the choice that I want to make. And I know that I have the power to change that. And, you know, I've been fortunate to sort of have manifested it in my fairly young life, to have this idea, this thought of living on an island and doing it, like that manifesting. And I think when you move past that and you begin to channel things and you allow that inspiration to just flow through you, that's another thing. And then when you recognize that you are that, you know, you are that awareness, that noticing, that isness, that is the supreme. And if you start there, then you recognize that the other two levels are lower, and you can choose those levels if you want to, and you can manifest things in this personal experience, or you cannot, you know, like you can just live on a mountain and just stay as peace, or you can get married and have children. I mean, they're all choices that you get to experience. And this waking dream state is kind of as like a unique opportunity to have this awareness of what's happening because of the presence of the mind, which you don't have in the dream state. That was also a lot.
No, it was beautiful though. I mean, I love, thank you for indulging in my sort of blast with that.
Pleasure.
Yeah, no, I love the, you know, I loved also the technique that you took us through that you've come up with is from your own journey is beautiful because, you know, it's we all, you know, some people, as Rupert Spira said, you know, some people wake up spontaneously, but it's not that common. And what is more common is probably what we're talking about is like there's this glimpse, just sort of like a free glimpse when we're young, and then it's what we decide to do with it after that. And I love the distinction you made. I feel like, you know, I feel that way that you said that. And when I say stuff like that, like where I was coming from with that is I love, there's a great Buddhist story that talks about a teacher, an enlightened teacher in an ashram with his students, and he gets word that his son has died. And he goes into his bedroom. Do you know this story? He goes into.
I feel like I might have just told Nikki the story, but go on.
Yeah, he goes into his bedroom, and his students hear him crying. He's in there for 3 weeks. And he doesn't come out of his room, and he's crying for 3 weeks, and they're very confused. It's like, why is our teacher crying? And so he comes out of the room 3 weeks later, and he's like starting to teach again. Everything seems back to normal. And they're like, why were you in your room crying for 3 weeks? And he said, my son died.
Okay.
My son died.
The twist of that same story. Or were you done?
Yeah.
Okay, so the twist of the story that I was telling Nikki is that the students were saying, and this is maybe the Taoist version, the students saying, but didn't you teach us that all is illusion? And the teacher says, yes, but he was such a beautiful illusion.
Exactly. No. That's actually, yes, the end of the story.
No, but yeah, it's probably just the Taoist way of saying it, and I think that speaks to the fact that the teacher recognizes, right, that it's an illusion, but that we are here to experience, and so oftentimes we enjoy our illusions. The challenging part is when we don't enjoy our illusions, and that manifests as suffering and pain and trauma. And the way out is the way in, right? It's the same approach of recognizing what you truly are, and that gives you a way out. And that is why I think a lot of times, you enter into the recognition of what you truly are because of suffering. But it also is the path, if that suffering arises, that it helps you to transcend that suffering because you know truth, like you've experienced truth. And so you don't stay there.
Yeah.
And I think that's, a fundamental difference. And it's the gift of this experience that you don't have to suffer, you don't have to struggle. And I think sometimes it's hard, though, when you have these glimpses, these awakenings, and then you still suffer and you're like, wait, I thought I got it. Why am I suffering? What am I doing wrong? What have I not understood? And it goes back to the identification. When you are struggling, it's because you're identifying as the person. So you're taking that lower vehicle, and all that's needed is to transcend and take your place as the higher, and know that higher to be you. And then, just as we experienced in those couple of minutes with what I call Instantly Zen, which is really nothing new. I'm sure many teachers share that in different ways. It's just that observer consciousness, which is you. That vehicle allows you to immediately transcend suffering because you recognize that it's not real. All that's real is that space, and that space is you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the distinction between pain and suffering too is my roommate is an amazing research scientist, and she's like, she's on this path too, and very, very, very smart. Right. And so she's like, we have to change our relationship with pain. Like, pain is a part of our existence. Suffering is what we're talking about. That's what's not natural for our existence once you wake up. Pain is inevitable. Pain, we are experiencing, we have physical bodies. We are going to have, our sun dies, whatever the illusion is happening, we are going to have pain. But then that suffering is that attachment that you're talking about, and the stories and all that. And so that's, I think, a distinction, that is helpful. And people have such an aversion even to just pain, which is actually quite natural for us as beings. Not that happens all the time, because the way and maybe I'm not explaining it right, but for me, like, I haven't had a bad day in 25 years. I've been like, because I don't hold on to stuff, right? I've had people experiences happen. My father died. I've had a divorce, many other things that have happened. But I process them, and it's like, but there's this within me that is so vast. There's no stickiness anymore. Like, the personality of Corinne is just having this experience. There's no stickiness anymore. I love what Ramana Maharshi talks. He talks about the distinction between desire. He said there's an impulse. So there's a natural impulse that happens, and that doesn't have a stickiness of desire around it. And so I started being able to, because I'm a very creative person. And so, but the creativity has brought a lot of suffering in my past before, with attachment to outcomes and things like that, as a musician and things like that. And Sean can relate to that too. Now, as I create, there is less expectation, less attachment, more just an impulse to create. But what I've found, the reason why this conversation is so interesting to me is there's like what my teacher Olea calls it as cookies. There's like still these little thing there of like, oh, is there an attachment to this book that I'm writing? And I'm constantly in check with that. Anyway.
No, that's good. A lot of really profound things. I would go back to the pain and suffering part, because as you were talking, I sort of feel that pain is of the body, suffering is of the mind. That's what came to me. So pain is like, as you were describing, like these impulses that you feel in your body. Like if someone passes away, you may feel it in your heart. If you break your leg, you feel it in your leg, pain. The suffering to me is, if you think of the mind as the current thought, if that current thought is of something, painful that happened in the past, you're bringing that memory into the present, and that becomes the mind, the current thought. And then experiencing that is experienced as suffering if it's a negative memory. So that's of the mind. And so when I think of pain and suffering, all perspectives are valid, and this is just my interpretation, not necessarily the law or truth or anything, but I feel that pain and suffering are both of the body mind. It's the person. And so when I talk about myself as pure awareness, as being what I truly am, or the space that, precedes even the I am, when I consider myself to be that, there is no pain and there is no suffering, because what I truly am does not have either. When I think of myself as a person, there is the potential for pain. And there is also the potential for suffering because of my thoughts. And what you were describing is that you don't have to suffer, which is transcending the mind, which is perfect. I think if you recognize that there's no need to even experience pain, it's also by, transcending the form. And that's done by recognizing your truest nature outside of this vehicle of the body. It's just an impression.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, ultimately, I do believe that, even Jesus screamed on the cross, right? So, so it's an interesting, I would say, concept.
The form of Jesus.
Yes.
The form of Jesus.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. Where yes, no, I totally agree. I love that pain, even bringing the pain, the emotional, like pain of a loss of somebody, is because I agree. Like emotions and feelings are totally of the mind. Like I'm totally down with that. Yeah. I have constant conversations with my coaching clients that they're like, but no, it's a part. No, it's not. But then again, it's like we are these spirits, we are awareness, having this, we are timeless awareness, we are beingness, having this experience as human beings, which are physiological until like I'm into Babaji living in the Himalayas. I'm totally into that, and being light beings and being beyond the physical pain. I'm into that. But right now, I do feel physical pain. I also have a massive experience, of me being aware of everything that permeates my background, permeates my foreground daily, which, but the physical pain thing, I want more with that. If you have any more jewels of that, that's
well, it's just identification, just that. I'll go back to Instantly Zen, that experience that we had. Neither of you experienced pain from that space of noticing. There was just the noticing. And so if you truly embody that to be what you truly are is that noticing, then you see that this body is just a vehicle. And I think that becomes the, sort of the next frontier after overcoming the mind is overcoming the body. And it's not to say that you need to walk on water like Jesus or, anything like that. It's just to say that everything is in its proper perspective, and you don't have to identify with that. So like, for example, for me, like I'll give a practical example. If a headache arises, I shift my attention to noticing and watching that headache. And through that noticing, I'm like, oh, that doesn't really, it's not there. I'm not there. And there's no, like, that experience is bypassed. Simple example, but it just points to this opportunity that we have to transcend even these forms. And there's certainly stories, of great sages and saints and masters who have, like my friend, the Taoist monk, his teacher rode out on a cloud. He witnessed it. Rainbow came and took him out on a cloud, and he saw it. Like those things, those miraculous things happen. But I don't think that that's necessary, right? It's not necessary to experience that, to know that you are not the body. And any kind of pain or suffering that's experienced in the body or the mind, when it's understood that that is not what you truly are, you create just enough of that separation to know that you don't have to experience that. And I know it sounds it sounds kind of woo-woo, but it's having that identification as your truest nature and really being that and really staying that, and not just kind of escaping in a meditation session and coming back. It's really just maintaining your presence there. And that's what I think the sages and the saints do so amazingly. They remain as that. Mm-hmm. That's our opportunity. That's our, our vision of what's possible.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think is fascinating is differentiating between those two things, but in the oneness that really is the knowing, the truth, the observing, and being in that space, not even identifying. That's I think my hang up is when you say knowing that you are that space, immediately the person, the mind wants to identify and say, oh, okay, now we have this new identity. This new identity is that space, and it's trying to claw and cling at these things. And what I think is funny is there's only so much that Sean, the persona, can understand. There is a limit to that which the personality can understand. Beyond that, there is not personality, there is not identity, there is not attachment to those things. And what I think is really fascinating about this conversation is exploring I want to say the dual nature here, where there is being in that space, knowing you are that space, knowing that truth, that love that is, but then also choosing to play the roles, choosing to play out the story, choosing to use that persona. That's really shaky ground from my experience. It's a landscape that there's not a map for that I've found.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really, really well said. I think that's probably the biggest impediment to this idea of enlightenment. Like, you have these experiences and it's like this grand thing. And then you try to understand it with the mind, so it's like, you're taking this like infinite experience and trying to process it with a finite tool.
Right.
And so that never quite works. And so then you question if it's real or if it's true because the mind can't comprehend it.
Yes.
And so it's like, I think the way that you truly experience it is by continuing to remind yourself that you're that which witnesses even the mind. So you reassert your, for lack of a better word, your dominance, as that higher. because you are able to witness the lower. The same is true with any pain that you feel in your body. You are that witness of the pain. You precede it. You're higher than it. So that pain cannot really exist in what you truly are because you're able to witness it. You know, so it's like it's a limited mode of your infinite nature. And if you recognize your infinite nature, your infinitude, if that's a word, then, you know, everything else you recognize is just an aspect, and you're just watching it. You're just watching it, and it's just all happening. And it's like, that's why I love nature so much. Like, there's so many analogies. You see the flower growing, and you don't know why it's blooming. You know, you don't know why it's happening, but it doesn't matter. Like, you're just appreciating the beauty of the flowering. And we don't often do that with our lives, right? We continue to try to prune and pick up the flower and, you know, see if the roots are growing. But in all of that picking, we're like removing the roots. And so the opportunity is really just to allow it to flourish, give it the water and the sun that it needs through our practices and our experiences of the silence. And then just realize that we're that which is able to watch the bloom. And then as we become rooted, to continue the analogy, we can become rooted in that, then we just allow new flowers to bloom, and we're not even worried how it's going to turn out. One flower looks like it's dying, but we're just like, oh, give it time. It'll be what it needs to be. And then all of a sudden it's like blooming. This is the life that we can live, but we're so busy pruning and trying to change and trying to adjust it to what we think it should be, that we're not actually enjoying and appreciating the beauty of the unfolding that's happening naturally and spontaneously. And that's because our mind, that limited mode of the mind, is the mechanism that keeps pruning and trying to adjust this flower that's already, you know, blooming and process of blooming. And maybe we're trying to speed up the process, but that flower is always going to bloom when it's meant to. And if we can approach our lives in that way and not have the anxiety of feeling the struggle and feeling the need to change things, then we can just appreciate that bloom as it happens, as it shows up in different ways in our lives, and trust that it's all happening for the highest good and it's all beautiful. It's all love.
Beautiful.
Hell yeah. Anything asked past that point just seems like minutia. I mean, that sums it up wonderfully. That really is a gorgeous outlook, and damn, hell yeah.
Thank you. No, this conversation has been so beautiful and so revealing. And I think that, you know, we all have our sticky points in certain things. And if we examine that stickiness and we really question it and observe it, then we understand what could potentially be the current distraction that we're throwing up in front of our infinite selves. And that attention, like we were saying about the question, just the attention will dissolve it. The attention that we give, the attention to our thoughts dissolves those thoughts. Like if you just watch our thoughts, they go away. The same happens with those different obstacles that seem to be present that are keeping us from that experience of our true infinite nature. The more that we just stay in the witnessing of whatever we think those things may be, whether it's pain of the body or suffering that we find ourselves holding on to, whatever those sticky points are, if we earnestly just remain empty and open and really explore that, then the truth reveals itself. You know, this is the beauty of grace. Like it just reveals. There's no effort really. It's just the attention. It's just the attention and the earnestness to be free that allows us to bypass all of those things that, seem to arise as like obstructions and challenges. And, that's just part of the dream. It's part of the dream.
Part of the dream. The beautiful dream.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing that I think we have to know that it is beautiful. And so all of the things that appear to not be beautiful are just not true. Mm-hmm. And so if we can see the unreality of those things that we feel are keeping us from the beautiful dream, then it really is all beautiful. And those sticky points, those pains, those, whatever it is, those things that feel like they hurt, that's just showing what needs to be dropped and what needs to be let go of to get back to your true nature as pure awareness. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Selena.
No, thank you. Thank you both. You're both beautiful. This conversation's totally beautiful. I've loved it all, and I'm sure we're way over time. So
we are, which I love when that happens. Especially, it just seems like it's been 5 minutes, and
truly.
So thank you so much for the gift of you and the gift of your time and your wisdom and your journey and just your heartfelt sharing. Just so much gratitude.
No, thank you. It's just a vehicle, just sharing. And I'm hopeful that it helps to uplift and collectively free us, because we are free, and we only need to realize it. That changes everything. It really does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, until next time, hopefully there's plenty more next times if you would allow us that.
I would love that. It would be my pleasure. I'm just on an island, plenty of time. So yeah, just let me know. It would be my honor, truly. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. Enjoy your day.
You too. Namaste.
Namaste.
And welcome to the mind-melting Say More section of the Selena Sage interview. I hit a wall at about the point where she said the questions dissolve the questioner, and I just kind of sat back and listened and hopefully said something profound after that. But that was something that resonated really, really heavy with me, man. There was I don't know. I think I told you after the podcast, I was prepared in a large way to receive the wisdom and truth that was said in a lot of the conversation.
Yeah, it was, that was fun. She had so many nuggets. I'm glad she's written so many books.
Yes.
Because she does have a way of putting things, in a beautiful way, that we heard many nuggets in our interview. And, and I love too that we are talking to so many different people, but then some of the languaging is the same. Like you said, there was remnants of, Alea and Dawn and different people who were on sort of the non-dual type path, even though she, has had many paths over her years. There is like the truth is the truth, that direct path into that awareness that's always and always will be there, our beingness. There's as many different ways as we've been talking about to experience it. And so that means that there are as many different ways to talk about it.
Oh man. And that's the thing we've talked about. I think we've talked about the Rupert Spira podcast that we've been both kind of listening to over the last, few months. And it's funny because like we are talking about very seemingly convoluted topics. They're very counterintuitive anyways to the intellectual mind, right? These topics that we're saying don't necessarily make sense right off the way. And we've talked about this before, I missed a few big things in the Alea interview that were like right in front of me and that I didn't get or I wasn't present for and I wasn't ready to receive in that moment. And then there were other things that she said that were, holy shit, kind of blew my mind. And then even Patty, there was a moment where I had this run-on sentence, blah, 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 blah moment. And then it was like, that's a lot of words. Like she didn't really know how to respond because there was so much coming from that point. And that's what's...
Are you going to talk about when I did that in this interview?
Well, yeah.
Is that where you're going?
That was my lead-in segue was, there was a point where you had that kind of moment because I don't remember exactly what you're trying to share or what the topic was, but it was like there's so many things that you have to reference to try to make your point about your perspective, not you, but one's perspective about these topics that sometimes it's just like, where the fuck are you going with this stuff? And you're just like kind of, I don't want to say you tripped over your tail, but like it was so many things to address in one statement. And
Was it fun for you to see me trip over my tail, Sean?
As humbly as I could have fun watching you trip over your tail, it wasn't. I don't think you were tripping over your tail. I think in the context of things, what you were getting at took a lot to try to get to, and that's what
You're being so kind.
I am being kind because I feel it. I know what that feels like to be like, I'm trying to say something. Somebody save me from me trying to say something. Just stop it right now, but.
So let me share a little bit with what happened with me. First of all, we had the conversation with this beautiful being, Selena Sage. And then we took a break. And then I said, Sean, I need a say more section that's not recorded before the say more because I've had some things happen. So anyway, I've had a kind of a fully loaded, sort of weekend, 5 days type of thing with a lot of emotional things coming at me, a friend passing away and, just doing a one-on-one session with Alea and then working with my editor on my book. And so anyways, I had a bit of a breakdown. And so I think that was the precursor to the breakdown was what we all saw in the interview was this energy was coming up in me. And I was trying to articulate sort of how I was feeling. And it was something I wanted to talk about with Alea. And then I was like, okay, here's this beautiful Selena person. So maybe I'll just be personal. And then it just also, and it was just all I could describe it as, I don't even know what I said. Just sometimes how you kind of say that. I don't know what I said.
Yeah.
And usually I'm very present to what I'm saying, but I could just feel energy. And so anyways, and Selena was so present and so focused. And then she, answered the best she could and had some beautiful points and then took us through, the stages, the Zen stages that she writes about in one of her new books. And so, so anyways, that was from my perspective, what went down was, just a lot of emotions coming up and you were so kind to process that with me before we pressed the record button. So now I'm, not teary-eyed anymore and worked through, hopefully the bulk of it and on now to discuss Selena.
Well, yeah. And that was, I think that's what came out of some of those, the context of that was, and she's touched on that in a lot of ways of like, even her process of bringing us into that, she called it instant Zen. That's not something new. And she was, she's like, this is not something new. This is my version of it. And there was a couple different points where we showcase that, yes, there is wisdom and it's recorded. And that was another part about it that I really enjoyed was we talk about, there's this ancient wisdom and it's deep and it's rich, but there's not a lot of roadmaps or even wilderness courses, mind wilderness courses. And I liked that we were able to share our experiences and our language about it and our verbiage about it and be open to discussing the different angles of how to look at something ultimately that is indescribable. And Rupert Spira kind of gets to that. I think that was one of my points about Rupert Spira was like, ultimately the things we're talking about aren't necessarily absolutely true because of the limitations of our language and our ability to articulate the all, and all that is within everything, and that open space of beingness. It's impossible to describe. So we're doing our best stumbling through that process. And sometimes we get on these tracks where it's like, really profound and it resonates. And that was something that resonated for me where, just some of the topics, the Zen topics, the being with that presence and, taking a moment to just sit in that level of awareness. And then there was other, the discussion about our personas. I really actually enjoyed that helped me because that's the relationship I have with my persona is, well, there's this experience of glimpsing that open space of beingness. And then there's life, right? And we kind of talked about that with the pain and the suffering. And, we're vacillating between these stages of being, stages of operating in this world together. And it's not always easy to tell where we are in that state. The way she talked about it resonated with me because that's how I feel that interaction with those different stages and degrees of being.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like it. Actually, this was a conversation that we had when we stopped the recording with Selena. She was amazing. I mean, we talked for an hour and a half in the interview, and then we must have talked for another 45 minutes after we hit the record button. And what she was sharing with us that I want to share with our listeners is that she's been writing. She said she feels like a lot of these teachers of non-dualism have written from a place of already being awake, where she sort of has written many of her books along as part of her journey while she was waking up, which I want people to know that because that's so beautiful. She said people usually find her books at these different points of what they resonate with, where they're at. And because she's got, I don't know, I'll list them all in the section, the written section below the podcast, but she's got 5 or 6 or 7 books or something like that, ebooks that you can order online, and you can see what you're drawn to from maybe what might help you from where you're coming from now, and how we articulate something, like how I articulate something 5 years ago or even 5 days ago is different than how I'm articulating it now. And that's the beautiful thing about this life that is an amoeba. It's like we have this beautiful screen of consciousness, this beingness that's always there and never changing. That's the concrete part of our existence. And then we've got the playground for the rest of it that's constantly changing and moving. And the fun part is being able to be established, as she said, in that awareness, in that absolute. And then the persona is secondary, having that experience is secondary. So we talk about it in different ways. We experience it in different ways, but that within us that we're talking about is actually can't talk about it. And I mean, you can't really explain it fully because it's different for everybody and it's beyond the mind. And also we all experience it at different times in different ways.
In different degrees, yeah.
In different degrees. And yet it's always the same.
And it's always the same. It is hard because it's counterintuitive to it's counterintuitive to know that. The persona, the experiencing being that interacts has limitations to that, right? And to be able to communicate that. And it's not always evident as we're looking at each other who's operating from what degree at what stage of whatever of that process. And that's why I really like that we talked about openness in this in regards to that, because it's very important to be open and not non-judgmental as we have these conversations, because what you might be seeing from somebody is one thing that you could be projecting your experience on that, but also they could be stumbling through trying to understand what it is they're even trying to articulate at whatever moment, talking about something that can't truly be really explained. And that's where compassion, understanding, love, she was a huge love advocate, is very important, because it allows for that space of, well, ultimately we're all going to stumble trying to get to that space. Let's stumble together, and let's try to help each other walk and move and grow, and let's cultivate a space of, fertile ground to grow from in this process of undoubted, failure. I mean, failure to really, be in that space. And I don't mean not failure to be in that space, but maybe this isn't everybody else's experience. My experience, and I think we talked about that, and it was either before, it was a lot of conversation, so I don't even know where or when we talked about this, but yes, there's that awareness. Yes, there is that presence, that backdrop. And then there's the persona me. Sean can only enter that so much, to such a degree, and then Sean ends. And then how do you invite that experience of beingness back into that persona experience? How do you choose? It's a practice, man, and it's. I think there's a lot of different tools, and there's a lot of different mechanisms of going back into that presence, going back into that backdrop, right?
Right. And Rupert Spira describes it as relaxing into it, because he says there's nowhere to go because it's already there.
Yes.
So all you can do is relax into it.
And that's a counterintuitive activity for the doing mind, the figuring out mind. The mind wants to activate and figure things out, project, know, create a pattern, and that is formless and patternless. So it's a difficult dance that becomes orchestrated, but
it can be a difficult.
Yes, thank you. For me, it has been a difficult.
Yes. Yeah, it's that commitment to coming from awareness to relaxing into the awareness throughout the day. And I guess that's what mindfulness means by being consciously aware in the moment. It's a different way of saying the same thing, right? Mindfulness is about being not just in the moment. Because I was having this conversation with one of my students the other day. She's like, well, my husband's like fully present. He doesn't like chew on things. He doesn't like, he doesn't get angry about things from the past, and he doesn't hold on to things like I do. And I'm like, but is he aware that he's aware?
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's the thing, is when people are present, that's one thing, because there are many people that are present. Like when you're doing your job, you're focusing, you're present. But the awareness of the awareness, that's that backing into, that allows the background to become more of the foreground.
Yes. Becoming aware of the piece of paper.
Because
that was kind of the example that actually resonated big with me, was that I am Sean, remove the am, remove the I, and then there's the paper is that backdrop. And what I've heard from Rupert talk about that, it's the observer sinks back into that space, the space of awareness. That I haven't explored too much.
The beingness. The beingness and awareness and space is always there. It's like, have you heard him say, describe the room you're in right now? Describe your studio where you are right now.
All of it? There's a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, just describe the main things, the first 5 things you see and notice.
Speakers, wall, that is fabric, TV, computer, microphone.
Yeah. Okay. So 90% of your studio space is space.
Yes.
So we pay attention to objects,
Yes.
but we don't pay attention to the space. And it's the same thing in our life with the space, the awareness, consciousness, awareness, beingness within us. It's always there.
Yes.
We just aren't turning our attention. And that's what it means to turn our attention to God, turn our attention to inward, that's what the I am is supposed to do. And
Yes.
I'll tell you, the I am really never did it for me, even though I'm totally a Ramana Maharshi girl, and Adyashanti, that's the self-inquiry path, who am I path.
Yeah.
I had to find different ways around it. For me, what has worked better for me is who is it that is aware of my hands? Who, like, more of it was a who, and it was like, why are my hands, like, it was different for me.
More of a question.
Well, the who am I is a question too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I don't know if and Adyashanti says that. He says some people don't resonate with that question. You kind of have to. And so took a couple of retreats with him years ago to finally get like, okay, now. And it was like, the language is different for me, but now I get it. Oh, I know what I want to say. Cause when you experience that with Selena, with the, I am Sean, I am, there's a mindfulness exercise that Sarah McLean does actually. And it's super profound to do it, where you write down like 10 statements of I am happy, I am healthy, I am chubby, I am in shape, I am not in shape, I am a happy person, I am not, what you write down all these things. And then you close your eyes and then you say, okay, the first statement, I am happy. And notice what happens in your mind. And when I went through that with her in this workshop that we did, I was like, as soon as you put something after I am, your mind is activated and quantifying and judging.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because that is an object.
Yeah.
To focus on instead of
instead of I am.
Yes.
And so that was a really visceral, I guess, because I'm clairaudio, like I can hear things better. So for whatever reason, that resonated with me more. I was able to sink into it and feel into it better that way.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm feeling from you saying that is kind of the feeling I had from that exercise is the objects of distraction, the objects are the distraction from the beingness, the space. That and that relationship that we have with those objects is really all that's standing in our way from turning our attention to awareness. I think.
Yep. Yeah. It's so interesting to me how many different ways of saying the same thing, and how I guess it's the same thing as when you go to a movie with 10 of your friends and you all see the same movie and you all can have a conversation for 3 or 4 hours about what the movie was about and what somebody missed and what somebody different did. Yeah. That's basically life. It's like we all have these different perceptions and windows and things we see and things we don't see and how the brain works. But ultimately, beyond all of that, there's the screen that the movie was on that everybody didn't notice until the movie was gone.
Yes.
It's like, oh, there's a screen that the movie was playing on. Rupert talks about that a lot too.
Yeah. Well, my favorite example of that is Meg and I both years ago read Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah. Together at the same time?
I think I read it first and then she read it afterwards, but I didn't talk about it before.
Yeah.
I just read it.
Oh, this is going to be funny. I can't wait to hear the difference.
So my takeaway was like, man, this person, had to make a huge change in their life spiritually, shifted their life, traveled, asked questions, discovered herself, found love, and ultimately, like, her whole life was changed by this adventure that was, documented in a book. And so then Meg read it, and she was basically like, yeah, it's basically about this self-indulgent bitch who marries this guy just so he could move to America. And I was like, that's your takeaway from this whole book? And that was same book, same experience. But, Meg, she's just that blunt. And she was very angry. She's like, that was a waste of my time to read the book. And for me, I was like, wow, I really understood her perspective. I got it. I actually thought the movie did not do the book justice.
No, I love Julia Roberts so much, and the hot guy that was in it, Benicio. I mean, nothing is bad with him in it, but I thought the movie was actually, and there are some people that love the movie. I thought the movie was actually really bad.
I just don't think she showcased the inner reflection and emotion.
Right. Really, which is hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. Yeah, exactly.
How do you wear?
Unless you have like a narrate, although she did have a narration in the movie of this is what I'm doing, but it's hard. It's kind of like Gone with the Wind. I remember when I read Gone with the Wind and I'd be crying every day. I read it when I was 12, 13. Yeah. And my sister, Mom, Corinne's reading that book again. She's crying. And then when I saw the movie, I hated the movie because it didn't show Scarlett's internal struggle. Like, she was actually a really good, thoughtful person. But in the movie, she just looked like a spoiled brat.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, that's interesting because Meg reads all the time.
Yeah.
I don't read at all. She reads a lot, and she actually likes books and going through it, but I think she was just bored because it was about self-reflection and introspection and finding yourself, and Meg's just like, give me some romance novel or some twisted morbid murder book, and that suits her needs, and that's what's funny, like, and that's my life partner. That's the person that I'm raising children with, and it's funny to be that far on different pages about our perception of life. But when it comes to interacting in life and, making decisions, and we do extremely well together, hopefully in part because of our differences, but hopefully we're similar in some kind of a way. But yeah, it is interesting how you would think that we've been together for almost 20 years. You would think that we would have started to affect how the other person is. Quite the contrary. Like, maybe a little bit here and there, but for the most part, we are still dramatically different people in our outlook on life, which is something I've actually had to learn to value and appreciate. Here's a life lesson for society. Learn to appreciate people's differences and value their differences, because it gives you a different angle on your life. And, that's when she hears me talk about this podcast and having all these conversations with people, she's just like, God, that sounds so self-indulgent. I'm like, yeah, but it shows me a lot about things I don't see. I'm hearing things. I imagine there's a lot of things that were repeated in different interviews. Surely there was some things in this interview that we even talked about that, yeah, this is not necessarily new wisdom, but it is a different angle on that wisdom. And for some reason, I was set up to receive that in a completely different way than maybe I had been. That's amazing, but that doesn't mean that's so what we do is we get fixated on that version of truth, right? We get fixated on the version of truth that resonated the most with us, and we say that is the ultimate truth, right? That's the ultimate resonant, beautiful truth, not your ultimate. And that's where things start to fall apart, because it can be that very subtle, differently nuanced, but it is all truth. It's all this absolution that's coming from that beingness and that space that all things are, animated from, I think.
Oh, I'm so grateful for you and grateful for the podcast, grateful for this moment, grateful for Selena for coming on and sharing her wisdom.
It's all beautiful, man. I'm grateful for you. We've certainly been in the you've watched me do it, that very small moment that you had. I have done in front of you innumerable amount of times in so many different capacities, and the fun part is to get through those stages and laugh about it and learn from it and grow from it, and keep cultivating safe spaces for each other. And you have certainly done that for me hundreds of thousands of times, probably. And
maybe not hundreds of that. Maybe in other lifetimes we've done it for each other. Probably,
yeah. You might have saved me from the Great Crusades at one point.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe you saved me.
Not the hero type, but we'll see.
Well, I love you and I appreciate you.
Love you too. Thank you so much for going through this. And until next time, enjoy this podcast and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts on how things are going.
See y'all next time.
All right, take care.